birthday.
Yes.
There'll be some celebration after.
Yeah. I'm Alexis. I'm the director of exhibitions here at Knockdown Center. This is Stephanie Acosta. We founded and produced the series Sunday Service. And Stephanie will give us a little introduction about what we're going to see.
You looked at me with such care just now. Hi, everybody. Can we all just do it a real quick? I'm gonna be a bit dork, but just just big deep breath. Thank you for being here. Super excited. As Alexis mentioned, this is our 5th season. It's top of our 5th season. We have micro seasons, so it's not quite Japanese, but almost. And we're really excited. This season brings us more artists curating evenings based on themes that either they're researching or that they have personal inquiry about. The idea for Sunday Service came around thinking about liveness and performance and gathering as discourse. So thinking a lot about the ways in which we were seeing a lot of showcases and opportunities to see performances lined up in any number of ways, but we weren't really getting to see how performance might exist for different kinds of artists in their mind, or how just liveness and live sharing might be part of their personal research. So we wanted to invite artists that maybe don't always get a chance to curate, particularly live events, to take something that they're researching, something that they have a personal inquiry about, and put an evening together that is about gathering, that is free, that gives us a chance to kind of be sort of inside the thoughts. So there's a way in which we're trying to fill a room and then be in that room together. And so thank you for being here today. We're gonna have a couple of folks share some stuff. We're gonna take a quick little break and then we'll have some more folks share some stuff. But before that, I want to introduce our curator for the evening, Sarah Zapata. And I'm going to hand her the mic so she can tell you a little bit about why we're here tonight.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you to Alexis and Stephanie. This has been a really wonderful opportunity to put together this evening. To really think about and talk about a lot of ideas that I have been researching, as well as some of my esteemed colleagues. So I just feel really thankful. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce the 3 artists that are participating this evening. So it's Ignacio Torres, Athena Torri, and Leslie Martinez. And so I'll get started. Ignacio Torres was born in the US-Mexico border of El Paso, and received his BFA magna cum laude from the University of North Texas. Currently, Torres lives and works in New York City and is known for his cyanotype portraiture of Latinx, which have a distinctly cyan blue color. Torres attributes his practice to his border upbringing and the Chicano culture he grew up in. His work involves the use of alternative photographic processes that require extensive manual work. The principal concern of his work investigates identity, othering, migration, and the physical or invisible borders that we vacillate between. Torres' use of the botany serves as a symbol to the threat of plant life created by man-made borders and references the historical use of the cyanotype process. His work was recently exhibited as part of a group show held by J.W. Anderson in London. Athena Torri, born 1989, is an Ecuadorian-Italian artist. Born in Milan, Torri grew up in Quito, Ecuador, before immigrating to the United States. Torri has a BFA from the Ringling College of Art and Design and a General Studies certificate from the International Center of Photography. Her solo work, titled Land of Opportunities, was exhibited at Delhi Gallery in New York. Conveyor Editions in New Jersey published Torri's first monograph, The Outsider. Torri's group shows include exhibitions at the International Center of Photography Triennial in New York, Material Art Fair in Mexico City, Re-Art Show 21 in Brooklyn, New York, Serpentine Galleries in London, and Stitching Electron in the Netherlands. And lastly, Leslie Martinez is a multidisciplinary artist born and raised between the Rio Grande Valley of the Texas-Mexican border and Dallas, Texas. They received an MFA from Yale University School of Art in New Haven, Connecticut, in 2018 and a BFA from the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art in New York City in 2008. In the decade between, they worked as a full-time graphic designer in New York City's apparel industry, where computer-aided design and garment construction profoundly transformed their image-object construction methodology, paving the way for a radically transformed approach to painting. Martinez is currently developing these emerging forms as an artist-in-residence at the Museum of Contemporary Art Tucson. Recent group shows include Independence at the McKinney Avenue Contemporary in Dallas, Texas, Heads Tails at Next to Nothing Gallery in New York City, Way Out Now at Diane Rosenstein Gallery in Los Angeles, California, and Kaleidoscope at Kravitz. Wonderful. So I just wanted to read a few excerpts from Cruising Utopia, which is by the then and there of queer futurity. How many times can I say that? So this is a seminal text from Jose Esteban Munoz, and it's something that I continue to return to. Certainly in thinking about queer as futurity, especially as we're approaching the 50-year anniversary of Stonewall, I think there's a lot of reflecting about what the LGBT movement has really done, how it has existed, and how it's really changing identity politics. And so I really like Munoz's use of queer to talk about really envisioning the future as now. So I'm going to read some of that. I begin this chapter on futurity and a desire that is utopian by turning to a text from the past, more specifically to those words that emanate from the spatio-temporal coordinate block referred to as the no longer conscious, a term that attempts to enact a more precise understanding of the work that the past does, what can be understood as the performative force of the past. A 1971 essay of the gay liberation journal, Gay Flames, included a manifesto by a group calling itself Third World Gay Revolution. The text, titled What We Want, What We Believe, offered a detailed list of demands that included the abolition of capital punishment, the abolishment of institutional religion, and the end of the bourgeois family. The entire list of 16 demands culminated with a request that was especially radical and poignant when compared to the anemic political agenda that dominates contemporary LGBT politics in North America today. We want a new society, a revolutionary socialist society. We want liberation of humanity, free food, free shelter, free clothing, free transportation, free healthcare, free utilities, free education, free art for all. We want a society where the needs of people come first. We believe that all people should have the labor and products of society according to each one's needs and abilities, regardless of race, sex, age, or sexual preferences. We believe the land, technology, and the means of production belong to the people and must be shared by the people collectively for the liberation of all. When we consider the extremely pragmatic agenda that organizes LGBT activism in North America today, the demand, we want a new society, may seem naive by the present standards. Many people would dismiss these demands as impractical and merely utopian. Yet I contend that there is great value in pulling these words from the no longer conscious to arm a critique of the present. The use of we in this manifesto can be mistakenly read as the we implicit in the identity politics that emerged after the Third World Gay Revolution group. Such a reading would miss the point. This we does not speak to a merely identitarian logic, but instead to a logic of futurity. The we speaks to a we that is not yet conscious, the future society that is being invoked and addressed at the same moment. The we is not content to describe who the collective is, but more nearly describes what the collective and the larger social order could be, what it should be. The particularities that are listed, race, sex, age, or sexual preferences are not things in and of themselves that format this we. Indeed, the statement's we is regardless of these markers, which is not to say that it's beyond such distinctions or due to these differences, but instead it is beside them. This is to say that the field of utopian possibility is one in which multiple forms of belonging and difference adhere to a belonging in collectivity. Futurity can be a problem. Heterosexual culture depends on a notion of the future. As the song goes, the children are our future. But that is not the case for different cultures of sexual dissidence. Rather than invest in a deferred future, the queer citizen subject labors to live in a present that is calibrated through the protocols of state power, to sacrifice our liveness for what Lauren Berlant has called the dead citizenship of heterosexuality. This dead citizenship is formatted in part through the sacrifice of the present for a phantasmatic future. On oil dance floors, sites of public sex, various theatrical stages, music festivals, and arenas both subterranean and above ground, queers live, labor, and enact queer worlds in the present. But must the future and the present exist in this rigid binary? Can the future stop being a fantasy of heterosexual reproduction? I argue for the disruption of this binary's logic and the enactment of what I call, following C.L.R. James, a future in the present. To call for this action of the future in the present is to summon a refunctioned notion of utopia in the service of subaltern politics. Certain performances of queer citizenship contains what I call an anticipatory illumination of a queer world, a sign of an actually existing queer reality, a kernel of political possibility within a stultifying heterosexual present. I gesture to sites of embodied and performed queer politics and describe them as outposts of actually existing queer worlds. The sites I consider are sites of mass gatherings, performances that can be understood as defiantly public, and glimpses into an ensemble of social actors performing a queer world. The Stonewall riot was a manifestation of pent-up energies that erupted on the streets of Greenwich Village in 1969. Today, I live and work in the village, and it is hard to find any residue of those energies. Yet the task of finding traces of those transformative political potentialities is nonetheless important. And in my research, I often return to that moment of countercultural fecundity. Stonewall is, of course, the birth of the modern gay and lesbian movement and the initial eruption that led to a formalizing and formatting of gay and lesbian identities. Although this turn to the identitarian was important and even historically necessary, it is equally important to reflect on what was lost by this particular process of formalization. Before this bold rebellion, there was another moment in which the countercultural map was perhaps a bit queerer, which is to say more expansive and including of various structures of feelings and habits of being that relatively restrictive categories of gay and lesbian identities are incapable of catching. When I turn to the ephemeral archives of queer New York, I'm interested in locating the anti-identitarian germ of this rebellion. Avant-garde cultural work from this period can be viewed from a certain vantage point, from which the complexity of these then inchoate identities can be seen clearly. This approach looks at the work of certain cultural producers as ephemeral archives of these previous understandings and cartographies of the world. I am most interested in identifying a certain utopian component in these archives. This archival turn is intended to do more than simply unpack the past, to move from then to now. It is instead to calibrate a critical optic that can potentially perceive the residue of the utopian impulse that animated presidential queer politics and move from then to here. This move from then to here is a move to think about the nature of the temporal and spatial in the queer utopian methodology that I'm suggesting. The time of the past helps mount a critique of the space of the present. This is not revisionary history or meta-history. It is a critical deployment of the past for the purpose of engaging the present and imagining the future. The purpose of this calibrating such an optic is then to deploy the knowledge gleaned from queer ephemeral archives for the purposes of reanimating and reviving this utopian impulse. So lastly, I'm just going to read a short piece of mine. My leg hairs are erect. Standing feels too weightless. I'm thankful to not feel my body, but it always worries me, like I don't appreciate it enough. I never want to be adverse to change. I know that I have a tendency to hold on to too much. I can't be like those older women who complain about how things used to be. I don't want to luxuriate in my misty perception of the past. The heart is the toughest part of the body. Tenderness is in the hands. With the first world came matter, then light, then limits. Human enlightenment could be described as the evolving ability to understand the nature and intricacy of limits. Thousands of hot little needles kissed my blushed body. My feet ached, the skin danced in the pressure of the water as it began to detach itself from the sole of my foot. For the proportion of my height, my feet are small. NewScientist.com performed a study of comparing two female faces. One was a composite face made from 8 women with unusually small feet. The other was a composite of women with unusually large feet. Women with smaller feet have prettier faces. The men were 3.5 times as likely to pick the short foot morph as more attractive, and almost 10 times more likely to say it was more feminine. Atkinson thinks men find these features attractive because they serve as markers of a healthy childhood. Biology knows that stress and poor nutrition during fetal development and puberty can affect sex hormone levels and cause early puberty. This can leave such women relatively short and stout, while those with a more benign childhood continue growing for longer and attain a slenderer, more stereotypically feminine face and body, which most men find more attractive. Since faces and bodies are shaped by the same hormones, you should be able to predict the attractiveness of one body part by looking at another. The dodome of a heartbeat is the most common example of this rhythm. A standard line of iambic pentameter is 5 iambic pentameter feet in a row. Today marks the 1-week anniversary of these eyelashes, each individually glued onto my eye. It's a day when I'm free to be me, free to make meaningful eye contact. Each slow blink is a flirtation with reminding me that I never stop being a woman. I'll tie-dye my blood type into every lining of my pants. I'm never escaping the refinement of English's constricting single syllable. I plant my right foot on the sea and my left foot on the land. It must have been love. And now we have Ignacio Torres.
Hello. Thanks for having me in Knockdown Center. Well, I'm going to begin with the first half of my talk with a lot of images and kind of like historic events that kind of inform my work that I've been working on. As Sarah read in my bio, I'm from El Paso, Texas. It's a border town in the West Texas desert, and this photo you could see El Paso in the foreground and Juarez, Mexico in the back. And in the mountains in the back, you could see it says Ciudad Juárez. La Biblia es la verdad, léela, which translates to the Bible is the truth, read it. And that's been there since I've been a kid, and every time I see that, I'm just like, why is that there? But yeah, this image kind of serves its purpose to kind of show the proximity of the two countries, the two cities, and kind of get an idea as to how I grew up in this city. This is an aerial view of both El Paso and Juarez. El Paso is like the more brightly lit side, and the darker side on the left is Juarez. And I find it really interesting how the border is kind of really brightly lit and so like delineated. Yeah. And this is another image as well. The X sculpture is like this giant sculpture by this famous Mexican sculptor, Sebastian. And I don't know, I just thought it was like interesting to see also the border and, I don't know, give you like a perspective and kind of scale of the two cities. So the first historical event that I kind of want to talk about is based in the Chamizal. It's called the Chamizal Dispute, and back when the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo happened in 1848, it was noted that the Rio Grande River was going to be the border for the Americas, and over time, the river like took a different course, so it started moving further south into Mexico, and after some severe like flooding, it totally just like veered off its original border. And for many years, it was kind of like a dispute between the US and Mexico as to whose land that should belong to. And you know, over time, around 5,000 settlers moved into that area known as the Chamizal, which then was left on the northern side of the river. And it wasn't until like 1968 that it was given, like part of the Chamizal area was given back to Mexico. And I don't know, I just thought that was really telling, because it just shows the fluidity of like borders and like water and nature just doing its course, and it's gonna do what it's gonna do. That's just a photo of the US and Mexican president kind of coming to terms in Juarez. And so the second historical event that really, when I first heard about it was really shocking to me, because I had never, you know, in school I never heard about it. And it's this photo that you see is the checkpoint in El Paso Juarez border at the Santa Fe Bridge. For every like Mexican immigrant coming from Mexico and second-class citizen in Juarez, you were forced to go through these checkpoints where they would like take your clothes off and kind of like inspect you for like lice or other things like that, and they would force you to like bathe, and you were doused in like tons of chemicals. So as you can see right here, there's like these images of like tons of Mexican men just like nude, being sprayed in the face with like really harmful chemicals to rid them of like disease or whatever they thought they had. And so this was like very degrading towards them, and it kind of reinforced the stereotype that was around those days of like the dirty Mexican. It's like cleaning them and not being worthy enough to come over because they'll just spread diseases or something like that. This image is an image from the Sonoran Desert, and all of the items that you see on the floor are left behind by migrants through their journey, crossing over to the United States. I thought this was like really interesting, and I found this archaeologist who goes by the name of, one second, Jason DeLeon. He is interested in these items as archaeological artifacts, and so what he's doing is he's collecting all of these found items and cataloging them to kind of better understand why people are migrating and like just understand like what's going on like behind the curtain. And he says that usually he could tell when someone migrated, how long they were walking for by the items that they leave behind. So as you can see in this one, it's like a black jug of water. Back then, before people were able to buy these, they would paint their jugs with like shoe paint to a black color so that they were a little more inconspicuous as they trekked through the desert. And so now they don't do that, they actually just buy them already black. So if he finds one that's painted, and that kind of indicates that it's an old kind of site. And so here's like one of those like students kind of like cataloging the rosaries and shrines that they find. And I thought that was like really interesting because like, you know, just like they still have a lot of these immigrants kind of like resort to faith while they're trekking these really dangerous climates and terrains. And this is another little shrine and like a little grotto of sorts. I'm also really interested in the way like Latinos are talked about in pop culture. And I mean, this is, I don't know if you know Paulina Rubio, but she's like a huge Mexican artist. She's been like acting, singing since the age of 4. She was in Timbiriche. And like back in the early 2000s, she came out with this album called Border Girl. Even though she's not from the border, she described it herself as like a border girl because she travels a lot and she has no one home. Like, I don't know. I thought that was silly, but I thought it was funny how these, like on the left, it's a MTV article I found from 2002, and the headline reads, Paulina Rubio hoping to cross over border like Shakira. And it kind of like reinforces like stereotypes people have of Latinos of like, we're like crossing, taking over like white American culture. I don't know, it sounds like threatening to me a little bit. And then on the right, you have another one from the New York Post, which reads, Mexican pop princess Paulina is ready to cross the border. And so I'm always thinking of like why these words are used when it comes to Latin artists, like the Latin takeover, Latin explosion. And I don't know, I just really critically pay attention to these things because I think it subconsciously kind of like prepares people to think a certain way and kind of see any foreign person as like a threat to like the culture. So these are just images that I kind of grew up with from like Chicano upbringing that are always like on my mind, that at the time I was always like really intrigued by, but kind of like, I don't know, I was never into Chicano like imagery. I was kind of like, I saw it as like less than, like I was almost embarrassed by it. And so like now I really look to these kind of imagery to inspire my work, and you'll kind of see that later and I'll explain it a little more. So So in Chicano culture, cholos are like Mexican gangsters, and in prison, sometimes like they would like do these illustrations on like napkins, handkerchiefs. So they're kind of like small in nature, and you know, when they were able to send these to like their relatives or whoever they were like writing to at the time. And so a lot of it had to do with like women or just like religion, iconography. And so this is an artist that I came across recently from LA, and he's like a queer Latinx artist by the name of Zapata, and he kind of takes that aesthetic of pen drawings in Chicano culture and illustrates them on boxer briefs, kind of incorporating like queer aesthetics and Chicano culture in one. This is like a close-up. And then I also came across this other artist called Tamara Santibáñez. She does like a lot of Chicano-inspired tattoos, and she recently has a residency at the Mad Museum, and she does these pen drawings as well, and as you can see, it's like also a little handkerchief size, and you know, it's still like going along the themes of like romance and, you know, this Chicano aesthetic. Another artist that I kind of get inspired by and informs my work a lot is these photos of Colombianos by Esteban Munoz. When I first saw these, I was really captured by the simplicity of these images and how striking these like characters are in these like tightly cropped frames. Just like it allows you to see like all the complexities of like their aesthetic, their hairstyle, the way they just like do themselves. And Colombiano culture is based in Monterrey, and they kind of mix cumbia aesthetics and music with cholo culture, religious iconography, and kind of have this like subculture of their own. And most of it is like from working class Mexicans. So at the time, they really stood out in Monterrey, and the cops there would persecute them because they thought they were involved with like cartel groups. And so most of these groups are kind of like disappearing and not visible in the city anymore. I also wanted to talk about like colleagues of mine that are doing really great things that I'm also like inspired by. This Güeras is an agency by my friend Maria Osado in Mexico City, and the X in Güeras is for like the gender neutral, like Latinx, and güero is like a term you call someone who's like light skin, blue eyes, blonde, in like Latin culture. Maybe it's just Mexican culture, I'm not sure. So she wanted to use that name to kind of as like a joke in a way, because her whole concept about this agency is to have representation of more brown bodies and gender non-conforming individuals in Mexico, because the majority of like mainstream media there just focuses on white, light-skinned, blonde, blue-eyed foreigners or white Mexicans. These are just some images that I really love. It's a collaboration with Barragan, who's also a Mexico City designer, Victor. And these photos were shot in Xochimilco, which is a very historic place in Mexico City. It dates back to like the Aztec times. And there are these like little gondolas kind of vibe, and these floating man-made islands that the Aztecs kind of built. And so I like how they incorporate this like historic, very Mexican aesthetic into their work. And here's like their most recent kind of campaign in Teotihuacan. So now I'm going to talk about an artist whose name is Anna Atkins, and she's a British photographer who released these books called Photographs of British Algae, Cyanotype Impressions, and she started doing these cyanotypes after her friend Sir John Herschel, the inventor, showed her how to do them. The process was invented in 1842, and she came out with these books immediately after in 1843. She was known as like the first female photographer and also the first person to make a photographic illustrated book. So I really was like captivated by her work, and I kind of like took that historical process and applied it to my own work as well. So now this first image is a self-portrait of myself. So as you can see, like I took the whole clown Chicano iconography and the cyanotype process and kind of explored that by dressing up in this clown makeup, adding that ruff. And this is just like the beginning of my work, kind of exploring what is the Mexican identity, what is the Latino identity, and yeah. So this is the project that now I'm like working on, and I kept experimenting with the cyanotype process, taking into consideration all of the inspiration that I had just previously shown you, and started photographing like friends of mine in New York or El Paso, where I'm from, and just asking them to pose for me. And this is my friend Enrique. He's from another border town in Mexico. He's from Matamoros, which is border of Brownsville, Texas. So it was really great to kind of like photograph him for this project. He was the first person I kind of asked to photograph for this, and just kind of began that with, this is my friend Victor from Mexico City. And so the process for these images is like very elaborate. I first began by shooting them digitally in natural light. I try to like not use as much equipment as possible so that I could actually go anywhere in the world and do the same process without having to lug around all this equipment. So I wanted to do this series of Latinx men, and I would put them in turtlenecks so that you focus on the person's features rather than like the small, like subtle, like clothing choices, and just allows you to like look at different like men and their features and things like that without looking at their color or their skin as well. Colorism is like a big topic that I'm interested in. It's like a big problem in Latin America, especially like growing up, white skin was like valued more rather than like a darker skin Mexican. So I started to kind of explore that, and the cyanotype process kind of like neutralized all of my subjects and removed that aspect of it. So this is another portrait. So then this is where like my inspiration from Anna Atkins kind of came in. I started applying botany into my portraits. I just like the idea of like the restriction of botany in borders. Growing up in the border, I remember as a kid being at my grandma's house in Juarez, And there was this little truck that would pass by with plants and things like that. And every one of my cousins at the time were able to get a little plant or pot of sorts, and I got this little cactus. And I was like so in love with this cactus, and I was excited to bring it back home. I lived in El Paso, and my family was like, no, you can't bring it, you could just like leave it here. And I didn't actually like understand why I couldn't just like bring it to my house when it was like so close. So I kind of like the idea of time and place and applying that into my work. So like the physicality of the flowers are like permeated onto these images. The size of the flower is the exact size you're gonna get on these like photograms. So I guess I'll explain a little more of how the cyanotype process works. I usually begin by mixing chemistry. It's a mixture of ferric ammonium citrate and potassium ferrocyanide. And so you mix them, and once you mix those two, they become light sensitive, but only to UV light. I then apply it to like a piece of paper. I could apply it to clothing as well, and allow it to dry. And then after that, I make a digital negative of a photo. Like let's say I shot this digitally, I then digitally print it onto transparency film. And then once I have the paper dry, I put the negative sandwich in between glass and expose it to the sun or a UV light box, which I do just for like better results. Because with the sun, it's a little unexpected, and it's easier to just kind of control it any way you can. So it's a very tedious and long process. But to get the exposed image to be revealed, you have to submerge it into water. And I really like how that is like a metaphor of like immigration and crossing the border. You know, terms like wetback or things like that are like things that I've been told personally, and I wanted to like kind of take that and take ownership of it and just kind of incorporate that into my work. So I don't know, that's why I feel like this process was like the best for this type of ideas that I'm interested in. And all of my subjects, they began, I started just photographing Mexican Latinx, but then I expanded it to like all Latin American, just to kind of add everyone to the conversation. And I realized that a lot of my friends were kind of dealing with the same ideas of identity. Like my friend Wallo, he was born in Peru, in Lima, but he moved here, immigrated, I believe around the age of 8. And so when I talked to him, I was like, where do you call home, or like, where were you born? And he's like, well, I was born in Lima, but I left so long ago that I don't consider it home, and I feel conflicted by saying I'm from Lima. Like he didn't actually like grow up there, so he feels like he's just like, I don't know, like taking ownership of something that he didn't actually experience. So it's like ideas that like I kind of go through, and many other Latin friends of mine kind of ask themselves as well. So this is a video of my process that I kind of like made like a time-lapse video. After I exposed it, I put it in water, and you can see like the process of it kind of revealing itself to you. So another aspect of my work is also making cyanotypes onto clothing. As you can see here, like the model is like completely drenched and wet head to toe. I like the idea of making these like portraits of just beings like fully submerged under like in water, and just like why, asking questions like as to like why are you wet, and just going back to like the whole migration process of like physically crossing borders through the river, also like pertaining to Cuban Americans, like crossing the ocean, and the whole dry foot, wet foot policy of being like, I don't know if you guys know that, but pretty much if you were caught in the process of migrating to the United States, if you were caught in the ocean, that was considered wet foot. If you were caught like on land, if you made it to land, that was called dry foot, and you were like allowed to kind of like go through the process of like seeking asylum in the States. So I just thought that was interesting, and I wanted to incorporate that into my work. And then I kept thinking about the trash in the desert, and I wanted to kind of incorporate these elements into my work. So I started adding kind of like trash bags onto my images, and also making cyanotype photograms of the actual trash bags. I don't have examples of them, but that's what I've been doing. And this is a portrait I did recently of myself. I want to elaborate on this kind of work that I'm doing and shoot more of this, but maybe when it gets warmer, so I could shoot outdoors. But yeah, I've always been interested in how people perceive me as a brown gay man. I've just a lot of times in like public spaces feel very seen as like this like brown Mexican man, and a lot of times I feel like I'm just seen as like a immigrant or like an illegal immigrant. So I wanted to turn that on its head and kind of make a series of portraits of me in like scenarios of being like in an office, at the mall, just like at a cafe, completely drenched head to toe, and kind of like have the viewer ask questions or to themselves like, why is he wet? Like, what does it mean? And yeah, that's it.
So we're just going to take a very quick break in case anybody needs to go to the restroom or get a drink, and then we're going to pick back up with the rest of the evening. Hi everybody, welcome back. This is the most well-behaved room we've had in 5 seasons. I'm just going to take a seat and let Tina take it away. And then Sarah will be joining us one more time, and then we'll be hanging out for a little treat. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I'm gonna get a little cozier down here. So my name is Athena Torri, and today I'm sharing with you my project Between Mountains, Valleys. It's a photographic project based in the land my family and ancestors are from, a small region in the Ecuadorian Andes, north of Quito called Imbabura. My work is inspired by oral histories and legends where reality weaves in and out of fantasy. So today I will be sharing with you some of the post-colonial legends which have influenced my work. These legends have been shared within my communities, throughout generations, at family gatherings, and long car rides through these valleys as we pass the colossal volcanoes who are at the center of these legends. Some of the legends I have translated and some are in Spanish.
Some of them are unaltered, and in some I alter only the gender pronouns. I invite you to listen to these stories and to take in the works I have been making, which will shuffle through behind me as I read. So the first one I'm going to read is called Imbabura and Cotacachi. They say that in ancient times, the mountains were gods that walked through the waters, covered with the first smell of the birth of the world. Volcano Imbabura was a vigorous young man. He got up early and liked to look at the landscape in the dawn light. One day, he decided to know more places. He made friends with other mountains that he visited frequently. But one afternoon, he met a tender man, Volcano Cotacachi. Ever since he contemplated it, a joy invaded him as if fire inhabited his insides. Nothing was ever the same. He understood that happiness was walking beside Cotacachi, contemplating the stars, and so an enchantment was born between these hills. After a while, these lovers surrendered to their love. The clouds passed, contemplating these colossal peaks that slept and braced in the middle of immense lagoons. The next legend is in Spanish, and it's called Juegos de Pelota entre los Apus. Los Apus son volcanes y dioses. Ellos tienen características como simples mortales. Muchos son buenos, pero muchos también son celosos o picarros. Pueden ser jóvenes o viejos, muchos son sabios, poderosos y a veces egoístas o malvados. Los apus andan por los valles, recompensan la bondad de los humanos o castigan al egoísmo. Si se nubla es porque las montañas están margeñas. Si caen truenos, en sus cumbres están furiosos, y si relámpaga sobre ellos están jugando. A ellos les encanta jugar el juego de pelota. Dicen que es una pelota muy grande, totalmente de oro, que lanzan de un lado al otro. Y como en los Andes hay bastantes apus, el juego es súper divertido. Dicen que el Cotopaxi es el mejor jugador de todos. Y mientras estos dioses juegan, los simples mortales ven cómo se lanza los relámpagos entre ellos. Y cuando uno de ellos gana, todos los animales de los cerros perdedores van como premio a las faldas del apu ganador. Los abuelos cuentan que uno puede darse cuenta del juego de ellos porque en un día soleado, de repente se presenta un choque de relámpagos en el cielo que va de un lado al otro, entre los cerros. Y donde más relámpagos cae, ahí se sabe que es el cerro ganador. Se cuenta que así saben los cazadores dónde ir a cazar. This next legend is in English, and it's called The Children of the Mountain. Legend has it that in ancient times, Volcano, mother Tungurahua, accused her husband, Volcano, Taita Chimborazo, of not giving her children who were white like him. In retaliation and much anger, she would spit out the mud and the ashes that boiled in her belly onto his white glacier. Taita Chimborazo, being a prideful man, did not want his wife to continue spitting onto him. So one day, he made a beautiful girl pass through his skirts in pursuit of a lost sheep he himself let escape. As she walked through his skirts, she found a beautiful, glowing, white-skinned being placed on her path by Father Chimborazo. She picked it up, admired it, and placed it in her flaja. From that moment on, the belly of the beautiful girl began growing day by day, month by month, until in 9 moons, she gave birth to a baby who, like Father Chimborazo, had white skin, golden hair, and blue eyes like the sky. Because of these legends, elders will advise their granddaughters not to walk on this mountain. There is a belief that Chimborazo customarily impregnates women who fall asleep in his skirts or urinate within his territory. When born, these children will be white, like Chimborazo. White children are the children of the mountain. This next story is in Spanish, and it's called El Lechero de la Laguna. And this lake is actually the same lake of the original story of the two lovers' volcanoes. So this is the lake that sits right underneath those two mountains. Hace muchos años atrás, los campos alrededor del volcán Imbabura se habían secado. No llovía desde hace algún tiempo y el maíz se estaba secando. Entonces los abuelos de la zona se reunieron a discutir la situación y concluyeron que el Taita Imbabura estaba enojado. Los abuelos decidieron que para quitarle el enojo tenían que sacrificar a Nina Pacha, la joven más bella del pueblo. Pero ella estaba enamorada de Hualcatic, una joven de su comunidad. Las dos huyeron al saber la decisión de los abuelos, pero el pueblo logró capturarlas. El Taita Imbabura, a ver el espanto de que el crimen que el pueblo quería hacer con la pareja, escogió a Nina y la convirtió en una enorme laguna, y a su novia la convirtió en un árbol a las orillas del lago. Con esto, el Taita Imbabura inmortalizó el amor de la pareja con esos eternos seres de la naturaleza. And this is the last legend I will share with you all that inspires my work. It's actually one which, if you go to the region of Cotopaxi and you look at the art that they make, this legend is like always in their drawings of these two condors that fly over the region. So it's really present in Andean art of that region. The condor who fell in love. In the meadows of Volcan Cotopaxi, there lived a girl who tended sheep. She was treated very badly by her family, so she preferred to be in the fields with the herds. One day, Abu Cotopaxi, witnessing her suffering, decided to help by sending down a condor to visit her. The condor, who had the power to turn into a human, began visiting her regularly, and soon the two fell in love. The condor eventually took the girl away from the fields to its nest high up on the rocks. The family, noticing the girl was missing, went looking for her with the help of a firefly, who had spotted the girl high up on the condor's nest. Once they found her, they attempted to kill the condor, who nearly escaped, and took back the girl, who they then locked up in a house in the valley below. The girl, desperate to escape, broke an opening in the thatched roof of the house and held a splinter of smoking palo santo to signal to her lover. The condor swooped down and took her away. With the girl on its back, the two flew over Kilatoa Lake to the high cliffs where the girl was then turned into a condor. Until this day, the two lovers are seen flying in the crystal blue skies over Kilatoa. Today, elders warn young women not to be taken by the condor. Thanks so much for listening, for sharing the space and listening to these stories that have shaped me and my work. I hope you have a lot of thoughts after that.
Hi. I'll just hold it. So I am going to be reading for Leslie Martinez tonight. They are at a residency right now, and they also have relocated back to Texas. So I'm going to be presenting a video by them and then reading some text that coincides. Private notes from my iPhone that have lost their dates and times. They span from recently to about a year ago, unedited and presented in no particular order. Recent materials reflect the reality of an ingrained ability to produce abundance out of scarcity. Tejanos on the border have always performed a kind of alchemy to survive, and I perform it in the methodology. We can turn anything out of nothing. Within that kind of trance, the work finds a way to exist, connect, and expand even through restriction. Materials lately are printer paper, wax paper, sketch pad paper, tin foil, shower curtains, old hospital bed sheets transformed with hand-mixed paints and finishes. In this work, queerness is self-consuming. Failures and regrets are processed and reformed, displaced and disguised from their original forms. Nothing goes to waste. Time is preserved in that spirit of the studio, in that nothing is for nothing. Attachments in the act of attaching are intentionally queer and resistant to the kind of completeness that states itself with certainty. I'm into the kind of work I want to keep finishing in my mind. The unfinished, unnameable, and forever changeable, because the work is everything it takes to make itself. Even the residue of production folds its way back into the central makeup of a future body. Eventually, the rag used to swipe down the table becomes the paint. Everything gets its time. Trans-Huascache is a queer methodology rooted in a historical lack of access for people like us. These studies are small hubs for me, little spider charts for future works happening in a small transition studio. This transition space is getting broken into. I put in major hours today and relieved a lot of lethargic depression. I'm reflecting on a body of work as I wrap it up. There's an underlying thought form to all the drawings. In some form or another, soft structures are being twisted, ripped, and dissolved. They are either floating in the air, submerged in the water, or doing something else. I like that I can't tell if the forms I control with my hand are dry and brittle or wet and flexible, strong or weak. They just do what plants, animals, and membranes of all scales do, but they're not still. They're in some paused space of questionable distance and scale. Materiality has a distinct presence and image space for me, in direct queer-ass relation to my own trans experience of gradual self-materialization through refusals or negotiations. We're letting go of the immaterial nature of self-conscious perceptions of disapproval leads to a stronger sense of actually being a living, physical person. I want all of my work to be destabilized in some way as a way of exporting the internal, unloading the burden of internal conflict onto others. It has something to do with a synthetic setup for cultivating the empathetic potential in others. Cut up one of the most beautiful things I've halfway made and had to present it as sort of finished. My work comes together and breaks apart with deep intention. I'm excited about this way of working. It's not about a lack of commitment to someone else's idea of the intentionality of starting from a whole. What if I want to spiral from the center out without being able to see the end? I only wish I would have been better able to articulate the correlation between my work and its process as deeply rooted in my queerness and resistance to the depth of work when the whole can be seen and the end determined. I want my work to be looked at deeply and closely and to be cared about for its nuances and language-based processes. It was always about a process of becoming and undoing, even before I articulated myself as trans. I'm proud of myself, even if people thought I was lost and confused. I made work through the deepest and darkest depression of my entire life, and I literally survived. I'm still here. All I want to do is make my work and for it to feel like it is deeply human. I don't want to go back to working. I need someone to support this. Obsession with fear of transition is embodied as a negative form of resistance inside my mind and body. I resist rest, peace, so strongly in a way that I finally realize is related to transition anxiety. I mean, when it's time to sleep, I always feel like an astronaut strapped in on takeoff with my head rattling in a helmet. When I fall asleep, I gasp for breath like I was drowning. My work is all about controlling the embodiment of new materials to do for it what I can't seem to do for myself, to cross over. Doesn't it make sense that I'm obsessed with paper, fabric as flexible rebar for rubber, plastic, and metal? All of this work is happening quietly right now in such a controlled space that I don't feel in control of anything. I have been feeling really deeply off to the side of myself with no compass, no definition of the frenetic speed or maybe slowness, no guide whatsoever for what is stable time or discipline or lack of discipline. I fight and fight this confusion and feel the most joy when I walk up the stairs in the morning with my coffee, when the dog walks ahead of me back to my bed and I turn into the studio instead and sit down and figure out what to do. I haven't worked for money in a month. I feel hazy and in a form of time that is unrecognizably stable or unstable. My work is physically slow but intellectually sharpened, embodied, more aligned. I always knew I was searching for conceptual alignments, but not within my body. I've only recently come to figure it out. On the road to and from the border, I always pictured parallel tracks as white lines with dots moving along them out the window against the sunset above the yellow switchgrass. Dots looking for each other like an equalizer, guitar strings being tuned. I'm such a Capricorn about the dignity and queerness of my work. I wish there was a way to make pie charts of the amount of time my brain spends in utter fantasy about my painting porn lexicon, how my brain functions in its way of accurately predicting the quantities and consistencies of material, and the sizes and scales of body of work, and how simple a press release could get without it being dumb and easy for people. Right now, I'm mentally brewing the materials and ratios for the transformation of cotton jersey with maybe resin, gack, beeswax, or shellac. Thinking about fabric dragging out as paper, working backward toward a sketch for something larger, but being large in smallness. It's about intimate surfaces holding memory inside of frozen strokes that may not be archival, or consistently conservative across the whole, the way we may think a cohesive market-driven body of work should be. I'm interested in the yellowing, aging, waxing, appealing, fogginess, cracking, and reflexing of the rigid, and then reinforcing the flexible. I basically just want my work to make people bust a metaphorical, transformative nut that shifts the entire way they see and feel their worlds. Deleuze and Guattari, our 2 pages in the Anti-Oedipus, have me thinking about my work in the last few months. Our critiques of art that see packaged wholeness, completeness as emblematic of success and active refusals to coalesce as failure fundamentally problematic. I can never help but draw connections between that question and the schism between heteropatriarchal oppression and queerness. I think about ideas of the not yet here, Esteban Munoz, as actually my work. Everything about my work has to do with having never felt whole. Being a trans artist has never felt like never-ending, flickering mental images and gestures towards chopping, cinching, blending into an impossible sense of future wholeness. Being from the border means I'm from somewhere not yet seen, and from nowhere that has been seen but never understood as a complexity, both and neither. I float forever wondering how I sit between these forms of comprehension, but I'm not mad about it. I very much know that lack of containment is my existence and active position. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for everyone for being here tonight. Sunday service is a monthly event, so please join us next month, April 14th, with Ray and guests.
Yeah, and hang out, talk to the artists. We don't do Q&As because we want people to hang out and have feelings together in front of each other. So do that, and we'll be right back with a treat.
What's the treat?
You'll have to hang out. You'll have to wait. It's a performative task.